George Gopen here. We come to the penultimate of our sessions on the wasteland. Long journey. In our last one, there was something I neglected to note, which I will note now. That passage that began with, "Here is no water but only rock," and went along with all those 4-beat lines, and then skinnied down to 2 beats if there no rock, if there were rock, and also water. And that whole dramatic passage ended from drip, drop, 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 drip, drop, drip, drop, 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 7 beats, down to 2, but there is no water. There was yet again an example of the technique I've been calling bookending. He started with "here is no water" and ended with "but there is no water." Now, we've seen him do it before a number of times. And what we're going to find in this session is that he is recapitulating little bits of what went before, as we are in movement 5, which tries to take the first 4 movements and shuffle them all together and see if we can come out with something. He goes back and recapitulates individual words that remind us of other times in the poem, and that might remind us, and that can bring back to our minds some of the existence of our reaction to those moments. Now, the better you know the poem, of course, the more this happens. The more the poem has become music, the more you recognize these repeated little themats. So we will take those into account as we go. In 4 quartets later on, all in 4 poems and 5 movements each, the 5th movement is often used to go back and put the other 4 together and come out with something like resolution at the end. Now, I guess I should mention at this point, good point to mention it, most of the people who have published anything on the wasteland find it ends with no hope, or if not complete despair, with just complete dismay, with things shattered, with perhaps the persona or one of the personae that have gathered us in, taken us on a journey through this poem, like Virgil took Dante through hell, that the persona simply goes mad. All restraints fly off. An explosion happens with all these bits and fragments from our classical culture gone kerflooey into the air. I have a very different vision of the end. I think the end is full of hope, full of peace, with a solution to the problem of what can you do when your culture has been blown to smithereens by a world war. You look around at the crumbling cathedrals, at the burnt libraries and museums, at the smashed governmental palaces, at the number of dead suffered. What can you do to go on? And the answer is, well, we have to wait till next time to find the answer. But today we look at what comes up to the passage, which will give us that answer. Okay, but there is no water. And here is our passage, our next stanza graph. What is that sound high in the air? Murmur of maternal lamentation. Who are those hooded hordes swarming over endless plains, stumbling in cracked earth, ringed by the flat horizon only? What is the city over the mountains? Cracks and reforms and bursts in the violet air, falling towers, Jerusalem, Athens, Alexandria, Vienna, London, unreal. Now, if we look back over the last few units, we get, who is the third who always walks beside you? What is the sound high in the air? Murmur of maternal lamentation. But after that we get who are. Who are. What is, who are. What is. It's all a series of questions. And we all always cannot quite recognize what we're looking at. Are we suffering from that Antarctic miasmal mist, ultra cold, inability to distinguish dream from reality, memory from revelation? What is that sound high in the air? Murmur of maternal, listen to the sound repetition that's creeping in again. We haven't had that for a while. We've had word repetition with water and rock and murmur of maternal lamentation, L's, M's, N's, as. Murmur of maternal lamentation, women grieving over their lost men, be them husbands, perhaps fathers or sons. Who are those hooded hordes swarming over endless plains? Does this bring to mind the Vandals and the Visigoths, the barbarians swarming over cultured, civilized Europe, bringing ruin to all the culture in their path? They didn't care about the theater, so the theater got struck down. They didn't care about the beautiful this, that, or the other, and that all got struck down. Is that what's happening here? Are the mongrel hordes, the hooded hordes? Remember we had Jesus who was hooded a minute ago. Who are the hooded hordes swarming? Not just an approach, but they're all over the place, over endless plains. If the plains are endless and they're swarming, we get a sense of how many there are. Stumbling in cracked earth. It's how bad the lack of water is. The earth is so cracked that one stumbles when trying to swarm. Ringed by the flat horizon only. So picture it, all the way out to the horizon. These hooded hordes swarming in on you over desert land. What is the city over the mountains? Now, mountains are back. We had a lot of mountains with the rocks and the waters. And over distant mountains was the high moment palace. There's a prison and palace of reverberation in the Gethsemane scene. Cracks, cracked earth, cracks and reforms and bursts, cracks, reforms, and can't stand it, and bursts in the violet air. The violet air. Do you remember Violet? You remember Violet? At the violet hour, who'd we get? The typist came home from tea time. fortita. And we noted there how violet was connected to the words violent and violate. And here we have the violent, violated air. Falling towers. Do we remember any towers? Violet's repeated in one line. Towers is repeated the next time. Where were the towers? They were the towers on the Thames, viewed by Elizabeth and Leicester as they made their two-beat way down the middle of the page, down the Thames. After the typist tea time. Falling towers. Those towers along the Thames are now collapsing, falling. Jerusalem, Athens, Alexandria, Vienna, London, unreal. Now, if you just read that like it was prose, Jerusalem, Athens, Alexandria, Vienna, London, unreal. You got 5 cities and an adjective. But that's not how they're on the page, is it? Jerusalem, Athens, and Alexandria are 3. Vienna and London are 2. Unreal is 1. Have we seen Eliot do something like this before? In much more sophisticated way. Here, it's pretty clear. 3, 2, 1, disintegration. How do we know it's disintegration? Not every 3, 2, 1 is a disintegration, because we were just told about falling towers in these cities, presumably. Now, Jerusalem, Athens, and Alexandria inhabit one line because they're all ancient cities. Vienna and London inhabit one line because they're both current day, 1922 cities. And take all of them. If all the men in the poem are all wrapped up in one man, and all the women in the poem are one woman, and they're all wrapped up, men and women in Tiresias. Here are all these cities wrapped up in a single adjective, unreal. But you know, we've had unreal before. We had it all the way back near the end of the first movement. The last stanza graph began, unreal city. Under the brown fog of a winter dawn, a crowd flowed over London Bridge. So many I had not thought death had undone so many. And it turned out to be part of Bookends, because the unreal city, he gives us even a note for it, is stolen from Baudelaire. And at the end of that whole stanza graph and whole movement is, you, hypocrite lecteur, mon semblable, mon frère. You hypocritical reader, you who are so like me, my brother. That was Baudelaire, so we had a stanza graph wrapped in Baudelaire bookends. But after the beginning of movement 3 in the fire sermon, we get the moon shine brightly on Mrs. Porter and on her daughter. Twit, 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 jug, jug, so rudely forced, dare you. The Philomela rape scene brought back, and then we get unreal city. Under the brown fog of a winter noon, Mr. Eugenides, the Smyrna merchant, shows up. Unreal. Well, we then come to our next stanza graph. And let me just read a few lines for you. And I'll get the text off the page. A woman drew her long black hair out tight and fiddled whisper music on those strings And bats with baby faces in the violet light whistled and beat their wings and crawled head downward down a blackened wall, and upside down in air were towers, tolling reminiscent bells that kept the hours, and voices singing out of empty cisterns and exhausted wells. What's happened? Things have fallen apart, things have burst apart. Are we arriving at the last whimper? Is our whole journey through this wasted land and all these lines in the poem? How many have we got now? We're closing in on number 400. Is this where it ends? In disintegrated nothingness? Well, this is a vision of what that possibly might be if it were the end. Is there anything to hold us together here? There are hints. There are references to things that have happened before in this poem. As we get towards the end, this poem becomes elusive to and of itself, not pointing quite so much to Shakespeare and Dante and Wagner and Chaucer and the Elizabethan age, pointing to its own history, its own past, to its own fragments. Let's take another look at that text. There's something else that creeps back in. There are 8 lines here. I'm just going to read you the end words with the rhythms of the rest of the line. Tight. It'll let me on the strings. As baby faces in the light, whistle and beat their wings, and crawled head downward down a blackened wall, and upside down in air were towers, tolling reminiscent bells that kept the hours, and voices singing out of empty cisterns and exhausted wells. It's not a perfect rhyme, but it's pretty close. Tight and light, alternating lines. Strings and wings. Perfect quatrain. We're back to quatrains. Rhyme holding something back together again here. Wall, towers, hours, wells. Well, it's not alternating lines. Now it's lines 1 and 4 rhyming, and 2 and 3. And 1 and 4 are close, but a slant rhyme. Wall, wells. But clearly they talk to each other in terms of sound repetition. So somehow there's something starting to put order back in. Now you can just look at the length of the lines as far as they go in to the page. You see that these are like equal, and this is shorter, that's longer, and this is shorter, very much shorter, and then longer. And if we count the beats, what do we get? A woman drew her long black hair out tight. 5. And fiddled whisper music on those strings. 5. And bats with baby faces in the violet light. 5. Whistled and beat their wings. 3. And crawled head downward down a blackened wall. 5. And upside down in air were towers. 4. Tolling reminiscent bells that kept the hours. 6. And voices singing out of empty cisterns and exhausted wells. 7, 8. So some things are holding it together, and other things will not stay still, will not stay in place. And let's look at the backwards links. A woman drew her long black hair out tight and fiddled whisper music on those strings. Remember anything like that? Let me see. All the way back towards the beginning. In movement 2, actually. The game of chess. Chess. We get and still she cried. This is the end of the lady in her boudoir with the fancy makeup at the beginning of a game of chess, the second movement. And still she cried, and still the world pursues Jug Jug to dirty ears. Jug Jug is the beautiful song, though it doesn't sound like that, Jug Jug, the beautiful song of the nightingale. But she's been turned into a nightingale, although in some poems she's turned into a swallow, turned into a nightingale. And other withered stumps of time, and withered stumps reminds us that Philomena's tongue was cut out so she couldn't talk. We're told of on the walls, staring forms leaned out, leaning, hushing the room enclosed. Footsteps shuffled on the stair. Remember the game of chess, the villain occupies the mother with a game, somebody playing her a game of chess while he goes upstairs to rape the daughter. Under the firelight, under the brush, her hair spread out in fiery points, glowed into words, and then would be savagely still. Hard to forget those lines, especially when hair comes back in. And we had it one other time, not quite as dramatic. It's the typist home at tea time after her assaulter or lover leaves. She turns and looks a moment in the glass, hardly aware of her departed lover. Her brain allows one half-formed thought to pass. Well, now that's done. I'm glad it's over. When lovely woman stoops to folly and paces about her room again alone, she smooths her hair with automatic hand and puts a record on the ground. And here we have fiddled whisper music on those strings, that hair that glowed and spread out in fiery points. A woman drew her long black hair out tight and fiddled whisper music on those strings. Boy, does that bring us back. Back and back and back 3 times. And bats. We haven't had bats before. We have had rats. Remember the rattled rats? And bats with baby, the bees, alliterations come back. Faces in the violet light. Violet's back again. It was just here a few words ago. And we remember coming once or twice back at the typist home at tea time. Bats with baby faces in the violet light whistled and beat their wings. Bats are not pleasant symbols. And crawled head downward, they hang downwards, don't they? So downward is fine, but them down a blackened wall, like the sighs in a famous poem about London by Blake. And upside down in air were towers. Well, so the bats, of course the towers would be upside down. But if our towers were back, and they're now upside down, the world is falling apart, being blasted to pieces. Imagine a bomb going off in a tower going into the air and coming down to earth upside down. And upside down in air were towers tolling, towers tolling reminiscent bells. Bats, baby, beat, blackened bells, lots of bays. Tolling reminiscent bells that kept the hours. Do you remember? Bells tolling the hours? Ah, yes. And each man fixed his eyes before his feet. Remember that? From those two Dante quotes, a crowd flowed over London Bridge, so many, I had not thought death had undone so many. Sighs, short and infrequent, were exhaled. And each man fixed his eyes before his feet and flowed up the hill and down King William Street to where St. Mary Woolnoth kept the hours with a dead sound on the final stroke of 9. Kept the hours. On the final stroke of 9, there I saw one I knew in Grote Stetson, and voices singing out of empty cisterns, and exhausted well. No water. Without water, life cannot sustain itself. You can go without food for much longer than you can go without water. 3 days, and you're done. How many days? 3 days. 3 days has a lot to do with the story of the end of the life of Jesus, as told earlier on at the beginning of part 5. There's a Christian ring to much of the beginning of part 5, but the Christian ring is not going to have the last word. The Hindu ring is going to have the last word. We'll get there next time. But we've got reminiscent bells and empty cisterns and exhausting wells. Wait a minute, what did I just hear? Remember how wall was an imperfect rhyme for wells. Well, bells is a perfect rhyme for wells. Tolling reminiscent bells that kept the hours, towers, hours, bells, wells, and voices singing out of empty cisterns where water should be and isn't, and exhausted wells where water should be and isn't. Let me just read that again. A woman drew her long black hair out tight and fiddled whisper music on those strings. And bats with baby faces in the violet light whistled and beat their wings and crawled head downward down a blackened wall, and upside down in air were towers, tolling reminiscent bells that kept the hours, and voices singing out of empty cisterns and exhausted wells. We're just about out of water permanently. The wells don't have any. The cisterns don't have any. We're going to die soon if something doesn't happen. In this decayed hole, the cistern, the wells, this decayed hole is among the mountains. We walked and walked on the roads, finding no water, not even the sound of water. And we get up to a decayed hole among the mountains, and in the faint moonlight, the grass is singing over the tumbled graves about the chapel. There is the empty chapel, only the wind's home. It has no windows and the door swings. Dry bones can harm no one. Only a cock stood on the roof tree. Cocorico, cocorico. Flash, lightning. Ringing. Wait. Now, I read that hyper-dramatically, but how can one not be hyper-dramatic at that moment? If one has been lacking water for so long, and one has just had a stanza graph that deprives one not only of water, but almost of the hope of water, because the places you go to look for it are long temporary or almost permanent places, cisterns, wells. And if there's no water there, and then you get to an empty hole, and you get a deserted chapel. What is this deserted chapel? The empty chapel, and Eliot gives us a note to it. The empty chapel has to do with the Arthurian knights' search for the Holy Grail. They are the Lancelots and the Percivals, who go about pure in soul and body, and therefore able to be able to discover this grail, wherever it is, whatever it is. And Lancelot comes, as does Sir Gawain, also a doughty swain of King Arthur's, to the Chapel Perilous. It's perilous because it's empty, and it seems to be the end of the quest. You see the chapel, you think, here it is, I've gotten there, and you get there, and it's empty. Not only is it empty, but it's been the end of the line for any number of people who have had quests. And they've reached the Chapel Perilous and died of despair. And the flesh has rotted away, but the floor of the chapel is encrusted with bones. We've had bones and the rattle of bones before. The one who can lose his hope here doesn't deserve to find the Grail. But the one who can confront it and say, as bad as this place is, as eerie as it makes me feel, and so full of symbolism of the end of death and ruin, I will carry on. There is the empty chapel. We have a decayed hole. We have faint moonlight and tumbled graves and an empty chapel. Only the winds. Oh, nothing else. No body. It has no windows. Wait a minute. Winds, home, windows. Aren't there little fragments of sound that are creeping in to suggest that something could hold together? Windows, doors, swings. Oh, wing, wing. Oh, so a kind of chiasmus of sound. After the wind, home, windows, wind, oh, wind, oh, wind, oh, wind, oh. Windows, doors, swings. These sounds are falling over each other. Dry bones. Dry door. Bones. Windows. Home. Dry bones can harm. Harm. Home. Has. No. No windows. No one. Dry bones can harm. No. If that is the response of the hero, who comes to this horrifying place, the windows don't exist anymore. The door swings. You know, folks, it's a sign of ruin that perhaps doesn't jump off the page at everyone. But I'll share with you a personal anecdote. And why this line, I can't get past it without thinking of it. So I might as well say it. At age 20, I arrived one morning alone with just a backpack and a coat and a jacket and a sweater, just in case things get cold, in the month of April in Salzburg, Austria. That evening is going to be the first night of Passover. brought up Jewish. I am Jewish, and Passover was an important holiday in my growing up. I had a rather remarkable grandaunt and granduncle who threw a Passover Seder for 70 people, and we had strangers in all the time, especially college students who couldn't get home. We had non-Jews. It was a great moment every year, a holiday devoted to freedom. And there I was, all alone, on the morning of the first Seder in the evening. And I think to myself, Aunt Jenny taught me what to do. I will go find, the rabbi or the synagogue, and they will point out to me where I could attend a Seder that night. Because I'm sure people do what Aunt Jenny did all over the world. Well, I got there at 6:30 or 7 in the morning, and next to every train station in Germany is a Reisebüro, a tourist bureau for those journeying. And I went in, and I had almost no German, and asked, where would I find the rabbi, where the synagogue? Wo is a word I know. Wo the rabbi, wo the synagogue. And they got together and they looked at me as if I was very strange and very foreign. And the three people who were in the office at that point got together and they took out a big city map and they're looking and they're discussing. I think this is a lot of effort here. And finally, here it is. And they give me a map and they put an X where I am here at the train station and an X where the only synagogue in town is. And that's where I can go. Well, it's 7 o'clock in the morning now, and I figured nobody's going to be there for a couple of hours, but it looks like it's a long way on the map. So I start walking. And I walk for the better part of an hour. The year is 1966. The Second World War has been over for only 21 years. For a Jew who has never traveled alone in his life, to be traveling alone in Germany and Austria, as I had been for a week, took from me some courage because I was scared when anything seemed like it might happen. But I walked to find this synagogue, and after about an hour, I found the building. Nice looking synagogue. All the windows smashed to pieces. It had no windows. And the door attached only by its upper. Should have been talking to you directly about that text on the screen, sorry. The door is smashed to pieces. The window smashed to pieces. And the door held only by its upper hinge. Waving in the wind. And a note on the door that I could understand, it said temporary housing for the synagogue was at such and such a strasse. And I happened to have a map, and I looked at it, and it was next door to the train station. I wish I had the time to tell you all about the Jewish family I found in that 6-apartment duplex building, who took me in for the Passover Seder and took care of me for a 7-day stay that I did in Salzburg. They had no English, I had no German. They were both, the parents, survivors of Auschwitz. And their 14-year-old daughter, who was taking English in school, told me all sorts of things they wouldn't have let her tell me if they understood English. But I don't have time for that, so I pass over that. I do not mention it. But you can perhaps see why I get stuck on the line It has no windows, and the door swings. And I tell you this story, not just to be personal or anecdotal, but I think maybe you can get a little bit more horror from the line, as the line is intended to have, I think. It's an empty chapel. Only the wind is at home. It has no window. The door swings, and our hero, in search of the Grail, looks in and sees all those dry bones. We don't have to be told that in a line if we know the story. And the conclusion is dry bones can harm no one. And he looks up, and there is a rooster, a cock, stood on the roof tree. And the cock sings. Is this perhaps the sound of water? The song of water? It's no nightingale. The rooster, wah, wah, wah. Sounds not so nice, but cuckoo-ree-coo, cuckoo-ree-coo. And a flash of lightning. Flash, there's got to be a flash of lightning, because what comes with lightning, then a damp gust, bringing rain. And with rain comes spring. With rain comes rebirth. With rain comes the end of drought. With rain comes the possibility of life itself. This is an astonishing moment in this poem and must be recognized as a moment of arrival. Everything that happens after this moment is in a unit by itself. And what is that unit? That unit brings us back to the title of this movement about the thunder speaking. Ganga was sunken. The Ganges River, sacred river in India. Ganga was sunken, so there's lots of water. And the limp leaves waited for rain. No, I guess Ganga's sunken because there's not much water. Just at the bottom, it's mostly dry. And the limp leaves waited for rain. Here comes rain. The cock has announced it. Well, the black clouds, which are going to bring rain, gathered far distant over Himavant. Here we have our distant mountains, but now they're not quite so threatening. Himavant, the high mountains in the Himalayas. And Himavant is a god of the mountains, and his son is Ganga, out of which the Ganges River comes. So the Ganges River, which was sunken down because it doesn't have much water, is going to get lots of water from this rain. The jungle crouched, humped in silence. You hear everything in this moment of tension. We have had the lightning, and what comes after lightning? Thunder. Then spoke the thunder. And what does the thunder say? Da! Da translates from these Indic languages into something equivalent to, do you understand? Do you understand? And next time we're going to find out what the thunder says. And just as the rain should bring us hope, what the thunder says tells us how to go about going on after things have fallen apart. And then we get this fabulous last stanza graph, which I believe has been misinterpreted. Every single person I have read on the wasteland. I've read a great deal, and I haven't found anybody who has come close to understanding how that extraordinary piece of art functions. So I hope you'll join me next time when I get to take you through it. See you then.